welcome. My name's Perry Brown. I'm the provost at the University of Montana, and we're glad to see you here tonight to learn something about mass extinctions, I think. But I'm not going to introduce our speaker. I just want to say that we're happy that you're here. We're happy to be able to have this series of talks, and we try to celebrate some real accomplishments of the faculty of the University of Montana with these talks. So we often, like we do in the presidential lecture series, bring in people from outside the university. This is a chance to celebrate with some of our own faculty members, particularly those in the last year who might have won an award, some other significant recognition, something like that, usually of a national or international or both nature. So the next lecture that we're going to have is on December 2nd, so we're going to skip a whole month in there. But Kyle Volk from the History Department is the person that will be speaking on December 2nd. Anyway, I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to ask Jenny McNulty, the Associate Dean in the College of Humanities and Sciences, to step forward and ask her to introduce our speaker this night.
Thank you, Provost Brown. It's my pleasure to introduce George Stanley today. I would say I've known George for a long time, but for a paleontologist, 20 years is probably not a long time. George came to UM in 1981, and since that time he's done many different things. He's the director of the UM Paleontology Center. He was the sponsor of Fossil Day, which was when? Last week, good. And he's also, I didn't know this, he's a fossil man on KUFM. And that's not telling, I can tell that, right? That's public. Okay. George has an extensive record of international and professional accomplishments. This year he was named a fellow of the AAAS. And whenever I talk to George around campus, he's always coming back from a dig somewhere. China, Australia, all over the place. One thing George said to me, or in an email, he said to me, I guess, is he would like people to realize that paleontology is not the same as studying dinosaurs, but rather it's the history of life and extinction. Fittingly, his favorite course to teach is the history of life. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Stanley.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. And also, I thank Provost Brown for inviting me. I'm going to, hopefully my voice will hold out. I'm drinking some special tea, and hopefully I will continue. But the topic that I'm going to talk about tonight is something I thought everyone would be interested in, and that's about mass extinctions. And I'll go into that some. Before I do that, though, I want to talk a little bit about me. I'm director of the Paleontology Center. I'm in the Department of Geosciences, and also the Paleontology Center. I'm a professor in geosciences. And that fellow over there, you can see, is not my grandfather, but he is Earl Douglas, who was the first graduate thesis in the whole university in 1899, and it was paleontology. He founded, single-handedly, Dinosaur National Monument, and there's a lot about him. We're endowed with fossils. Here's Monty Dolak, a popular artist, rendition of the state of Montana. And everywhere you see an image, could we dim the lights a bit? Well, maybe not. Everywhere you see an image is where a fossil is. And I've been to only some of those, only a few of them. But I bring up these images, and they're not from Montana necessarily. But I would ask you, what do all those fossils have in common? Well, if you guessed they're all extinct, you'd probably be right. Yes, and 99% of all species are extinct, and if we didn't have extinction, we wouldn't have the world going anywhere. You may notice the lowland gorilla is on there for a point, that it's among the walking dead. We have a term, walking dead, for those species almost gone. It wondered if it will survive. I spent a semester teaching in Belize, a little country in Central America, and this was the poster that they had to try to save the jaguar, who was being hunted and to extinction. But getting to extinction, the end of an individual is one thing, but the end, the end of another individual, all its material, is another. So the severance of an entire species, genus, or family means cutting off all the gene pool, everything genetic. There's nothing left, and there's no going back. It's gone forever. Extinction is forever, just as the poster says. So, what is a mass extinction? And a mass extinction is not the same. And a mass extinction is a geologically short event with a lot of dying going on. Many kinds of organisms across the board. You have all kinds of organisms, plants, you have animals, microfossils, all these things. So it's quite different in its magnitude and very important in my presentation because we've had a few. So what I'm going to cover with you tonight is that, first of all, extinctions in geologic time. I'm a geologist, and we have a certain advantage in deep time, understanding it. And the other thing, I'm going to talk about what's happening in the sea. A lot of people don't know about it. And also, I'm going to talk about what's happened in the recent past, in the geologic past. And also the future of our planet, which is a pretty heavy topic. And being an educator, I can't help but the last presentation is what can we learn from this? So I noticed that there is a plethora of topics going on. Have you noticed today that there is an enormous amount of movies and books and media types? Everything embedded in them is the mass extinction. I wondered about this. Why are they so prolific nowadays? And I got to thinking it's part of the human psyche. You know, we hear about these extinctions and people are worried about the earth and about even themselves going extinct. I think it's symptomatic of something. So evolution is what generates diversity. And it's generated incredible diversity. And Darwin's metaphor, of course, was the great tree, the tree of life. And you can see that tree of life branching and the branches going upward. And this would represent the evolution of species. A more actual example, and this is a cartoon that depicts all the animal groups. Plants are excluded from this. But it does show a variety of organisms representing each of the major groups. And this line right here represents the division between the sea and land. Above here would be land. And I like it because it shows humans right here as a small branch, conferring no special status to us. And as my introduction said, there's the dinosaurs, admittedly nature's special effects, but only a little small branch on a great multifarious tree. And a lot of attention goes to that. You know, not believe how many people say, oh, you're a paleontologist. That means you study dinosaurs. No. But something this doesn't show is the culling out, or the mass extinction, which is the grim reaper, which actually prunes that great tree. And what takes that diversity away is mass extinction. Now, books have been written on it, and throughout my lecture, those of you that are interested, I'll be showing a bunch of books. I won't have a list of readings at the end, but if you would like to copy them down, feel free. One of the books that came out recently by Michael Benton, a personal friend of mine, is about the greatest mass extinction of all time. And I was talking to Michael one time, and he said, oh, George, it's like what was his quote? A crazed, axe-wielding madman attacking a tree and chopping off most of its branches. So that was a vivid image of a crazed madman. And so that's what extinction really is, the lopping off of the tree. And what we're left with after that is a highly pruned tree. And that tree, if it survives at all, will have to grow again. And that Darwin's tree does not show that at all. And this grim scene is actually getting us into thinking about causes, you know, the whodunit. What are the causes of these extinctions? And they're quite varied, and many of them. And one of the things that people are interested in as dinosaurs. I come back to dinosaurs because everybody wants to know what killed the dinosaurs. They don't think about the fact that maybe 70% of life died. But I want to go over 3 old ideas with you. And these are ideas that are, that are quite old, but I think they illustrate the point. And these are sex, drugs, and violence. Now, people like this because they said, oh, this is what is symptomatic of society today. And the sex one is interesting because these dinosaurs, these dinosaurs are these are reptiles, and reptiles today, when they have a lot of heat, overheated, they will actually change and not be able to reproduce or produce only males or only females, and conceivably could cause extinction. The drugs are even more interesting because there's a whole variety of drugs that are produced by flowering plants called angiosperms. And if you think about it, these evolved about the same time dinosaurs went extinct, flowering plants. And here is that one up there that you can see is the castor oil plant. The castor oil plant in the Guinness Book of Records is the most poisonous plant in the world. A single milligram of this plant can kill an adult. There are other ones too. Cattlemen know loco weed. Dieffenbachia was used to feed the slaves. Smokers know that one. Hippies know that one. And so the idea is that dinosaurs ate these plants. They don't have olfactory organs. They have no sense of smell if they're like reptiles. And so they just OD'd. Stumbled off cliffs, got stoned, and so forth. You can see an example of one. Gary Larson had a good cartoon in which he talked about the reason why dinosaurs went extinct. And so this kind of fits into my topic. So there you go. So these 2 ideas are pretty lame. I mean, they don't hold up to scrutiny. They're not testable scientifically. They've fallen by the wayside. But the one that has survived is violence. And I mean horrific violence. The recognition of this was a scientific breakthrough, and it's been dubbed the Alvarez scenario, based on a couple, a man and his father and son team, who discovered iridium and connected it with dinosaurs and impacts. Now, not only dinosaurs, but a major impact took place. And about 65 million years ago, a meteorite, an enormous meteorite traveling at 50,000 miles per hour, slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula at a low angle. It hit and threw up 50 times its mass in particles and dust up in the atmosphere. The debris fell back to Earth and as incandescent material that started fires. Clouds of burning vapor and clouds of debris raced at supersonic speeds across the planet, killing everything in its path. Now, this is pretty severe violence. And, you know, if you were a ceratops in Alberta somewhere, you'd have about 5 minutes to live before you were hit by that supersonic wave. It poisoned the oceans, and darkness and nuclear winter followed by cold and freezing. The ecosystem collapsed, and about 50 to 75% of all life died out. Dinosaurs died out, or maybe I should say non-avian dinosaurs, because birds are considered dinosaurs. Other reptiles as well. 4/5 of mammals died out, and no animal really larger than a cat survived. So it killed the ocean, killed the plankton, killed the food chain, killed all those sea reptiles, the long-necked plesiosaurs and things like that. And not to mention ammonites and clams and mussels, and it killed all reef creatures. So, and the list goes on and on. It was pretty major. One of the things I want to talk about is that dinosaurs are considered, the word dinosaur is considered antiquated, out of date, destined for extinction, things like this. It's far from the truth. I mean, how many people think of this? I hear it all the time. So the take-home message is, don't call your car a dinosaur. Dinosaurs were perfectly adapted. They were going perfectly well. They lived for 100 million years. Why not another 100 million years? They were just in the wrong place at the right time. Moving on, and that was an advertisement for rental cars I saw. I thought it was pretty cool in the airport, one of my journeys. talk about the legacy, because as a geologist, we have a rich legacy of history, and that legacy is derived from information from the geological record. A lot of the ideas are meteorite impacts, some are huge volcanic eruptions, and others are things like supernovas and solar flares, things like that have been proposed. And down in the bottom right is representing some data. Right now, paleontologists have been assiduously collecting data for 30 years. I mean, 30 years in the library on electronics, chronicling every single species, its range, its distribution, when it died out, and so forth. And so the dinosaurs are shown there. And if you train your German field glasses up there, you would see the details. Sorry, it's so small. But the point is, it's a lot of data. And this data has been used for very interesting research. And with those data, we can produce charts like this, which show extinction rate on this axis. And today is here, and the ancient past in the Cambrian is there. And you can see at least 27 of these mass extinctions when the rate of extinction rises far, far above the background rate, which would be, the background rate would be along there, along here. So out of those many extinctions come 5 that are called the 5 big extinctions. And here they are. They are, and their percentages are shown next to them, the percentage of kill, and then we're talking about genera here. And so there's one at the end of the Ordovician, one at the end of the Devonian, one at the end of the Permian, one at the end of the Triassic. Hey, my students always say, why are they always at the end of every geological period? And then the light bulb comes on and they say, oh, yeah, could it be that the geological record was based on that? Yeah, the geological record was based on that, and our founding geology fathers actually recognized it without recognizing mass extinctions, by the way. And so these are the 5 big ones, and the one that kills the dinosaurs is only a 47 percentile up there, the last one. So this is the background rate. So this is what I'm talking about, how these 5 mass extinctions rise way up further past what we would call background extinction rate, when we pass extinction rate in time. So it is a, and in fact there's a couple others, but they stand out as sore thumbs. The one I want to talk about that is probably much more horrific than the one that did in the dinosaurs is the one that occurred at the end of the Permian. It's called the end Permian extinction. And Siberian volcanism is blamed on it. And this volcanism produced over 3 million cubic kilometers of lava. Can you imagine that much lava? It released tremendous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Temperatures soared. Seas warmed above more than 18 degrees. And the chemistry of the ocean just went haywire completely. Animals suffocated in the oceans. There were acid oceans, and reefs collapsed. Every reef organism collapsed. And corals were severely affected. In fact, every single coral died. Every single coral died. Now, I've worked with some Chinese colleagues that have gotten some very detailed methods of dating, and they have gotten the end Permian extinction down to 100,000 years. So it happened in that seems like a lot of time to you guys, but it actually is very short. It's an eye blink in the geological record. So after this was all over, and when we tally it, we find 90% of species were eliminated. Carl Zimmer, who's a very well-known science writer, termed it a truly grotesque place. And he was right. It must have been. The water turned murky. It was horrible. And the aftermath is what I like to study. And the aftermath, when everything settled out, we were left with a lot of dead things, a few surviving, the few 10% that survived. Over 85 to 90%, the figures vary, of species in the marine environment died. 70% of land vertebrates died out. That's pretty sizable. Reefs collapsed totally, and they vanished. This is called the reef gap for about 5 million years. Can you imagine reefs gone for 5 million? And I would say the same thing for tropics. All the tropical environments were destroyed. So how long did it take for the ecosystem to recover? And this is very important when we talk about where we're going in the future. But for now, the figures that come out say it took about 10 million years. 10 million years for the ecosystem to recover to a state where it was before. And that's a lot of time. And it causes us to think. A figure from my friend Charlie Varon, who is the Australian specialist on reefs, shows the this cartoon, which shows Ordovician, Silurian. This is the today all the way to the ancient past in millions of years. And where you see these symbols here, it means where reefs occur. And these dark black symbols are times when we have reef gaps. Reefs are gone. And you can see they're sizable. There's 5 to 10 million years, and they're pretty major. And so the environment was like that for a long time. And Charlie Varon in his book says that each mass extinction event corresponded to episodes of very, very quickly changing atmospheric CO2. CO2 builds up. Carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas, as you know. I'd like to change now, talk about what's happening today. And some of you don't know this, but there's a major crisis going on in the oceans today. And we humans on land don't really think about it a lot because we don't, a lot of us, I scuba dive, but a lot of people don't go into the water. They don't see it. They see more of what's on the land. But it is pretty major. And there's been books written about it. Some of the books here. You can see the effects by the prices of seafood. You know that fish used to be the poor man's meal in the early days, and now it costs more than steak. So we can really see the impact of this on the marine ecosystem. And it's pretty serious because 50 million people actually subsist on fish, and 1 billion people actually live on it for their sole source of protein. And 76% of corals are really in trouble. So if we move on to coral reefs, this is my specialty. They're impacted just as well. And a beautiful picture of a Mozambique coral reef that I had the pleasure to see one day. Ocean acidification. These are the assaults. These are the things that are really affecting corals and reefs today. And you've heard about it, I'm sure. Global sea warming. Any one of these by itself would be enough, but there's more. There's major coral bleaching. This is when corals turn ghostly white and they die. And they're predicting with this El Nino year a major 2016 bleaching event, which will wreak havoc on the reefs, of course. And over-nutrification through not direct dumping, but by, say, agrochemicals and things like that seeping into the environment from banana plantations and whatnot. Of course, we have the rise of coral diseases. I just finished writing a paper on coral diseases, and you know there's one pathogen that was a bacterium that was found that would trace directly to human sewage that was killing the corals. And that was very interesting because people dump sewage into the water and think, well, it's going to help the corals and they'd like to eat it. But it's not true. It's the opposite. I went to the 2012 International Coral Reef Symposium in Australia, and it was a very interesting scientific exchange and a lot of talks. But one of the things that came out of that was a serious concern for the future of reefs. And they presented us with the details, things that I don't study. But the idea that reefs will be dead by 2050. Some of you will be alive then. By 2050, reefs will be gone completely. Florida's only barrier reef, and I had the pleasure to learn how to scuba dive, the only barrier reef in the Western Hemisphere, will be dead by 2030. And it's probably too far gone to be recovered. It's among the walking dead. They actually call it zombie taxa. we paleontologists, the walking dead, who are so far gone they will never come back. And here, some interesting work was done with photographs. These photographs were done by a huge amount of people all over the place, documenting before and after. And it was so clear what was happening to the reefs. We were losing them in a big, big way. And Charlie Varon, my friend who studies reefs, he cries about it because he thinks that in his lifetime he's seen them healthy. So I want to talk about the CO2 problem. And as you know, this is a little blurb from the EPA. But in the business as usual model, as we inject more and more CO2 into the atmosphere, altering the carbon cycle, and also adding to the other problems that we have and the inability of the oceans are great sinks and the forests are great sinks, but they have been oversaturated. And like last year, I think this year, over 40 billion tons of CO2 was injected into the atmosphere, and that was about 2.3% over the previous year, and each time it goes up. And I think that if aliens were up there watching us, that they would look down and think that our sole purpose on Earth was to inject as much carbon as we could into the atmosphere as quickly as possible. They wouldn't know why, but that would be their conclusion, I believe. So what's happening with this? So the CO2 buildup's evil twin is ocean acidification. There's been a lot about it. And this shows how it happens. Some of you are familiar with the chemistry, but these are the CO2, water, and carbonic acid is formed. It's like blowing a straw through a soda or water. You create carbonic acid, and it's actually reaching the point where it starts to destroy little microorganisms that are floating in the food chain. Their shells are destroyed, and corals are starting to go. And here is corals. These are parts per million CO2, and that's the healthy reef. And this one, 450 to 500, is about where we are today. And corals are starting to degrade, and this is the projected greater than 500 parts per million will be the downfall of reefs. That's be 2050 when we lose them all. So it's pretty frightening news. A bunch of geologists got together last year and published this paper in Nature. It's a really interesting paper because it's on ocean acidification, one of my topics. And they plotted ocean acidification in the geological record using a variety of means. And they're plant stomata, plant remains, stable isotopes, many, many different ways. And these are all the data. They range back and forth. And this curve here shows CO2 in parts per million that is estimated from these data. This shows data from the ice cores, which is much more recent, this ice age. And then over here is more the time of humans. And you can see what's happening. And here we are now, 400, and we're rising. And these are possible scenarios in a business as usual situation if we keep putting CO2 and it keeps building up and ocean acidification keeps occurring, maybe up as far as 2,000, which would be devastating. And we can see times when that actually happened. You see those peaks? Those are the mass extinctions. These are 4 of the mass extinctions that we talked about, shown in those peaks. And there's one here called the PETM, which is very interesting. That's a more recent one in the Cenozoic time. It's not one of the big 5s. But if we look at that one, and there they are, it's the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. There's been a lot of research done on this because it's something that we could apply to today. And we have good data, very good data about the levels of CO2. And this is a curve, and this is the time of the episode between the Eocene and the Paleocene. And here, a guy with a core that records some of that on an NBC news show last year talks about global warming and how this affects directly. It's a model to let us know what might happen. And as you would surmise, this 56 million year ago event was CO2 buildup, major CO2 buildup. There was hothouse conditions, and temperatures increased in a major, major way. And there was a massive die-off. Oceans became acidic. And the increase occurred in a very, very short time. And that was the big surprise. And there's a little blip on there where they were able to resolve a 9-degree jump. It took place in only 13 years. Wow. If that is really true, it's that much change would really be devastating to everything that we know about. 1 degree is enough. 1 or 2 degrees would, the difference between that would be possibly a kill factor. Well, where are humans going these days? I'd like to talk about that. And here we see the evolution of humans. We're getting smarter and smarter, as you can see. And we actually end up with our smartphones. But we are getting smarter. And where are we going? And if you want to know where we're going all over the planet. And we're procreating like all get out. And if you look at world populations, and this is an interesting chart because it shows estimates from 2 million years ago, but it gets more accurate as you go here. And you can see what was happening in the population growth. Here's the Black Death. It hardly looks like anything. And then with the Industrial Revolution, this huge explosion. And when this was made, we were at 6.7 billion people on Earth. Now, it's out of date. You know how many are now? 7 and counting. There's a website you can go in and watch the numbers crunching. My professor, God rest his soul, he's dead now, but he was looking at this chart, and he said, by golly, this matches the CO2 curve. And he superimposed the CO2 curve on this chart, and lo and behold, they matched perfectly. It was a perfect match. So he wrote to this is back in the 70s, 80s, and he wrote to the World Census people that they don't need to count heads anymore for the world. All they got to do is just measure CO2, and they know how many people are in the world. So there's no doubt that humans are involved in this in a big way. So what are we doing? We humans today are increasing. We're ever increasing. And we are transforming whole landscapes into something different than they were. We're exploiting wildlife in a big way. We're polluting, poisons, introducing invasive species, which is a big topic right here in our wildlife biology program, and releasing massive amounts of the greenhouse gases we talked about. And all this is pushing extinction further and further, higher and higher. So here's some extinct species, recent and today. You can see a lot of them that you may know, like the woolly mammoth and the dodo bird, the sea cow that you hear a lot about, and so forth. Oh, and there's Homo stupidus. Homo stupidus. That's a very apt name. Oh, and look, we're included. And it may very well be that we will be part of that whole story. Homo stupidus. That seems right. Oh, there's a Sasquatch. I don't know how many people believe in Sasquatch. No? Yeah, some people do. I think he's extinct. There's actually a fossil basis for it. But anyway, those are really interesting to look at. Extinct species. The list could be much, much bigger if I had them all. News from Brown University and other places, and National Geographic and Science. Extinctions. There are major extinctions that are underway, and these extinctions have been recalculated with more and better data, and they're now 10 times worse than previously thought. I mean, we're in deeper trouble. Species extinctions from the headlines happening 1,000 times faster because of humans. And so it's picked up. And well, what we know about this, and I'm a paleontologist, so I'm proud to say a lot of this data has come from the fossil record. Because we can look at charts like this, and this is one that's very, very interesting because it has extinction per thousand species per million years along this axis, and these are the groups. mammals and birds and amphibians, and this is for all species. And this is, look at that first, that's the long-term average. Over here is the long-term average, and that's information that's gotten from the fossil record. And that long-term average will give you the rate at which species are dying today. And it's not very high. In fact, it's a little bit different for mammals than it is for invertebrates, as you can see here. But it says for every 1,000 mammal species, less than one went extinct every millennium. And that's what it looks like is a normal rate of extinction. And you look up here at the current extinction rate, and if we measure it by those standards, it's up to 1,000 times higher than the fossil record. Yeah, and that's a really surprise. We're in a mass extinction. And that's my bottom, my delivery line is that we're in the 6th mass extinction now and don't know it because we don't see things so clearly as human beings with a short lifetime. The projected future extinction rate is more than 10 times, 10,000. Wow. So the future, if in a business as usual scenario, will bring us into some very serious problems with the rate of mass extinction. And some people have looked at these data and they've said, well, you know, we're in an extinction right now, and that extinction is as deep as it was during the time of the dinosaurs' extinction. E.O. Wilson, I had the privilege to meet him when he came to the university. Really an amazing man. A naturalist who has embraced so many different fields. I think this should be, this should be, this should be required reading for everyone, every student, this Diversity of Life book. It's a great one. And he's a very big supporter of the environment, and I'm sure you've heard of him. Other books that you may want to look at are here. An article in the prestigious Nature magazine shows that concludes that Earth has entered the 6th mass extinction. History of Earth and its Mass Extinctions by John Amsden is one I would recommend. And down here, an old one, but Richard Leakey wrote one, which is quite good. He's the guy who discovered Lucy. And, of course, E.O. Wilson has a new one out, Half Earth, and I've not gotten to read it all yet, but I would recommend that one. Those of you that like fiction, there are even some books out. That's a cool one. I haven't got it, but I'm going to get it. It's called The 6th Extinction. It's a novel. So this stuff is getting into the popular press. Well, Elizabeth Colbert, were any of you here when she came to visit? She won the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for her book, The 6th Mass Extinction. I've just finished reading it, and I'd really recommend it. She's a journalist and staff writer at the New Yorker magazine, and she also works with National Geographic extensively. She says Mother Earth has started house cleaning again, and she goes over all these cases where you can see it. And her book, by the way, Notes from a Catastrophe, was required reading in 2011 for the freshman. What's it called? The freshman reading experience? Yeah, first-year reading experience. But basically, her line, when you read this book, it's not just the mastodon bones that are going into the trash. It's humans are headed for extinction because due to largely to their own follies. And I think it's worth reading. But articles have come out about this. I'm sure you've seen them. They've been widely publicized. The 6th mass extinction is upon us, and humans will be the first victims. And the 6th mass extinction will eradicate 75% of life on Earth. Well, why not? In the Cretaceous it did. At the end of the dinosaurs, it might do it again. And you might think that we are adaptable, but I would dare say that humans will not be in the picture. We're out of it. We would not survive. We're not that adaptable. We're gone if it does occur. Can we stop the 6th mass extinction? This is a big question, and I don't have the answers. A lot of people think we can. There's a lot of people that think we've gone too far into it. But what can we do? How can we stop it? What can we do? Well, we can stop treating the Earth like a corporation that's gone belly up and gone bankrupt. Everybody rushes in to get everything they can before the end. Or we can stop treating the Earth like it's, treat it like the Earth that it should be. And anyway, there's things that we can do. One of the things we can do is establish refuges, cut down on the production of CO2 is a big thing, but create refuges and areas of protection for endangered species. When it occurs, what happens afterwards? And who will survive? That's an interesting question, isn't it? What will happen? And this is something I can come and bring data from the fossil record to discuss. I mean, I can, give you a hit list. I can tell you who died during these mass extinctions. I can tell you where they lived. I can tell you their ecological tolerance, what they liked, where they lived. So much data that could be invaluable to understanding where we're going. What's the old adage? Those that fail to learn from history are destined to repeat it. Who said that? Somebody told me it was Winston Churchill, but anybody know? Anyway, it may be true that those who don't learn from history, like us, will be destined to repeat it. And Peter Ward, a friend of mine from University of Washington, Seattle, came out with this book. You don't see the title, but it's called Future Extinction. And it's kind of cool because it shows what will happen. This is what will happen after. And so something always survives. Every time something survives. And you can see down there the trash and garbage from us. You can see surviving, what those are, dandelions. They've grown into giant trees. And jackrabbits have become the size of kangaroos. Cockroaches are gigantic and they fly. They've survived. Cockroaches will probably survive a nuclear holocaust. They're so hardy. And chickens have become the size of a T-Rex and taken over. So we don't know. I mean, this is all science fiction, but something will survive. Something will go on. So coming back to my last topic, what we can learn from this. Well, we're Homo sapiens, right? The name literally means wise man. And with our big brains, you would think that we would be able to learn about these mass extinctions and learn that the geological past, of course, is our teacher, and that's the key to understanding the present and the future. And I think with our big brains, we should be able to do that. And here you see our ancestors with a fire on their faces, something like Neanderthal or Homo erectus. And here's the race of people who are living today. And I think with our big brain, and I like my brain coral, that we may be able to come out of this. And I'm sorry I went over time a little bit, but thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you for, thank you for that great talk. We have some time for some questions. Thank you. If you'd like to come up to the microphone, or I can move it around since we're filming. Yeah.
It's such a small room that most people can hear.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I just have one question. This is falling. You had said that the mass extinction took about 100,000 years, and then it took X number of years to return back to some state. And I guess that was my question.
10 million in the case of the Permian.
Is there a, quote, state that one always goes back to? Or has it always been changing all the time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would think that it's different for each one.
Okay.
But, and the magnitude, and it's interesting, the severity of the extinction is not already correlated with the recovery. Sometimes it takes a short amount of time for the big ones. But nevertheless, I would think that there is some commonality there.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking, is there some optimum temperature, optimum CO2 level, et cetera, that things finally get back to, or?
Yeah, well, to answer that question, you have to know what the cause was. And it's very much wound up in the cause. But yeah, it takes, quite a bit of time to recover. And, I give these lectures a lot, and people in the audience always ask me, oh, well, you always say after each mass extinction, the species come back, recovers. So we've got nothing to worry about. Business as usual, life will recover. Yeah, but we won't be there.
Right.
Another question?
Could you talk more about Sasquatch and that's?
Oh, you were the one who likes Sasquatch. Well, there's a fossil that's called Gigantopithecus, and there's actually fossils of it, and it was 9-10 feet tall, and upright, and large, and probably hairy, and it centered in the Himalayan mountains and spread out, and it actually encountered anatomically modern humans. Humans that were Homo sapiens, and nobody knows, but it's thought to be extinct. But I mean, as a scientist, I would like to see, we operate on the principle of guilty until proven innocent, contrary to our judicial system. I've got to see some proof, and there hasn't been enough proof for it. But I mean, I wouldn't doubt the Loch Ness Monster either, but I need proof.
Can you tell us, are there benefits of mass extinctions?
Well, cleaning house is hard to think of one, but cleaning house actually just changes the earth, and we don't think about it, but the Permian mass extinction actually brought us into a whole, you may have something to say there, because it brought us into a whole another kind of life. And the kind of life that came afterwards, the predators evolved and all these things. And so the modern fauna took shape. And the modern fauna would not have taken shape had it not been for that Permian extinction. So in a way, all this change that we see in the fossil record, I teach a course called History of Life, we talk about it, is it a good thing? No. But I mean, it depends on who you are. If you're a brachipod, it might be a good thing. But if you're another species, not. But that's an interesting thought. And this cleaning house, as it's been called, I like that term, house cleaning, it could have some benefits. Maybe the best benefit would be us being gone.
Dr. Stanley, is there any way to tell from the fossil record any role that difference in solar heat or irradiance played in previous extinctions?
Temperature?
What's the sun doing?
Yeah. Which are you thinking about? Which kind of scenario are you thinking about?
Well, maybe as a contributor to heat in general.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them are what we see is the Earth heats up very clearly. Almost a meteorite impact will do that. Volcanic eruptions will do it. Almost, not all, but most of the causal factors will do that. But the hard problem is that we, in geological, in the geological record, as geologists, have a hard time quantifying temperature. We can get a general ballpark figure, but it's hard for us to put absolute numbers on that. CO2 may be better, but temperature is a very difficult thing. But we do have some stable isotopes that we get from little shells of calcified organisms that help us understand that, if the calcified organisms haven't been recrystallized or changed. And the information that we have is available, and it does look like temperatures raged out of control after these mass extinctions. It's a good question. Any others? My pleasure.